you very much, Ed, for a fantastic presentation. You made the disclaimer that you write a column for Bloomberg. I'll make the disclaimer that I don't receive any of the royalties that accrue to you for your book, but this is a fascinating book. I think most of you around the room have read it. I don't know if it's in Spanish already.
It's in, I got the Portuguese copy last week.
Okay.
And I know there is a Spanish copy, but I don't know if it's out.
It's really a fascinating book, and I really recommend everybody to read it. I'm going to make a brief summary of what I got from the book, and then try and ask you a question. I don't know if it's a question, probably a general reflection, and then I will ask the minister and Juan Mauricio also to reflect on what you've just said. What I take from your book is like two broad discussions. One regarding issues related to the US, in which, as you said towards the end of your presentation, you want people to actually have to pay for the externalities they produce, and you don't want public policy to, ill-advised public policy to create the incentives for people to live outside cities. So you mentioned public education as being much better in the suburbs than in cities, a highway system in which people don't get charged for the emissions they produce, and a tax system, which is quite common not only in the US but elsewhere, which encourages people to purchase large houses. And then towards the end of the book, and certainly towards the end of your presentation, you talk about China as being the great challenge in terms of environmental issues going forward. As China urbanizes, you say, look, China remaining rural is not an option, because that will make them poor forever, and they don't want to be poor. They will urbanize. So the big challenge is whether they will urbanize in high density places using public transportation, or in low density places using cars, the American way, 1.5 billion people creating really a big mess in terms of the environment. And I think all of the issues that you discuss in those two setups are extremely persuasive and I think illuminating. But I have the view that I was left somehow like thinking, well, and what about Latin America? Because cities and countries in Latin America face, to my view, quite different challenges. First, we are already quite urbanized. So the issue of an urbanization process is probably not the most relevant, although we continue to urbanize some countries like this one for the wrong kinds of reasons in terms of people being displaced from the countryside. Second, as opposed to China, and I would describe China as probably having a benevolent dictatorship, we are highly democratic, so sometimes benevolent, but at least benevolent in the terms of economic planning. We are highly democratic, and certainly, as opposed to China and maybe India, we don't have the tons of public money to provide for public infrastructure. And with maybe the exception of one or two countries, and here I'm talking about Latin America in particular, these are generally small countries whose economic prospects hinge not on their domestic market, which could be the case for China or for India going forward, but rather succeeding in a globalized economy. So any decision in terms of urbanization, of infrastructure to promote certain patterns of urbanization, is a major decision. We cannot get it wrong. I presume that the zillions of big cities that are growing up in China, some of them will go bust. We cannot afford that. So what are the institutional arrangements that you need to solve all of the complex issues that you already state in your book that are prevalent even in some developed countries, in countries in which what is really at stake is how do we link our process of urbanization and the development of cities with the challenges of competing in a global economy. Because you mentioned the high price of real estate in New York or in some US cities because of the decision not to have high rises at certain stages of development. And you talk about the problem of excluding the poor from living in those cities. that is okay. But in the case of countries like ours, it's the problem of making these cities uncompetitive. What is the, where do we bring economics and the process of economic development and the challenges of being competitive in a global economy in this discussion of how to think about the cities, how to think about the cost of living in cities, and how to think about internalizing all of these externalities that up to today have not been internalized in many developed countries. And more specifically, and before giving the mic to the minister and to Juan Mauricio, I would like to ask a very specific question. And this probably has to do with whatever experience you might have in Latin America. This notion of congestion charges, which you so clearly explain in your book in the case of London, in the case of Singapore. How can we talk about congestion charges in cities that provide such inefficient public transportation? Because you mentioned this as a charged political issue in the US, in which for the most part you might have decent public transportation. How about congestion charges in cities that are not able to provide their citizens with reliable alternatives to actually driving their own cars? So you might want to think about a thing or two, Ed, of your experience in Latin America that you might bring to the table to complement the excellent presentation you've made. Once again, many thanks for being here with us, and I'll give the mic to the minister and to Juan Mauricio. And then maybe, if you so wish, we might take a question or two from the public. Thank you.
Sí, muchas gracias, Roberto y profesor Glaeser, por esta presentación tan extraordinaria. Sí, ¿ahí me están escuchando? Sí. Ah. Bueno, muchas gracias, profesor, por esta presentación y Roberto por esta selección tan relevante para nosotros en este momento. La pregunta que yo le haría sería la siguiente: la estrategia colombiana en vivienda urbana y en desarrollo urbano en Colombia se está concentrando fundamentalmente en tratar de reducir el déficit habitacional. Esto quiere decir tratar de darle una solución de vivienda a la población más pobre de Colombia, que se concentra en las principales ciudades del país. Algunas voces nos están diciendo que nos estamos equivocando porque estamos precisamente, lo que usted indicó, atrayendo a los pobres, que estamos trayendo a los pobres en las ciudades porque ahora tenemos esta cantidad de programas en las principales ciudades del país. Y lo que nosotros hemos dicho desde el gobierno es que nosotros no estamos trayendo a los pobres están ahí y están muy mal. Y las situaciones de agua potable, de saneamiento básico, de infraestructura, de transporte, de educación y de salud, pues es una situación muy precaria. Pero de todas maneras ese comentario es un comentario válido. La pregunta es, ¿cómo podemos lograr un equilibrio, darle una solución a la población pobre en las ciudades colombianas donde se concentra la población, pero no traer desproporcionadamente población de pequeños poblados o de pequeños municipios del país que de alguna manera deben estar allí? Incluso hay quienes piensan en Colombia que nosotros deberíamos empezar a fundar ciudades en la mitad de ninguna parte, que nosotros por supuesto consideramos que eso no tiene ningún sentido y creemos que lo que debemos es consolidar el crecimiento, consolidar nuestras ciudades y hacer con nuestras ciudades unas ciudades mucho más competitivas, y pues no hay manera mejor de crecer que eliminar la pobreza. Nosotros pensamos que no puede haber ejemplo de ciudad que convive con situaciones de pobreza. Aquí tenemos en este calendario, no sé si lo recibieron ustedes, no sé de qué ciudad del mundo será esta fotografía, pero en Colombia los pobres, profesor, ya están ahí. Nosotros no los estamos atrayendo de manera especial, pero la pregunta es un poco hasta dónde debe llegar el modelo que fomenta la construcción masiva en las ciudades donde se concentra la población.
Thank you very much, Professor, for an impressive and a very interesting presentation. Yeah. Okay. I hope my English is better than my Spanish. So. But yes, I'd say that thank you for this presentation. It has been really impressive. First of all, a comment, a candidate to become, for the next elections here in Bogota, to become a mayor. I'm not going to say his name because I could get involved into politics. So I'm not going to do that. But he wrote a paper that I read recently saying that with the message that the Latin American cities should not follow the patterns of development patterns of American cities, in the sense of that we should focus more on getting higher densities, more public transportation, less use of cars, etc., etc. I definitely, I would say from your presentation, I conclude that you endorse that point of view. It's my conclusion. Now, from your presentation, I have just like two questions. One is about the key role that you that has the human capital accumulation in explain city dynamics, as you say before, the importance for growth to have people with skills, for urban growth to have people with skills. There is some causality issue there that I just would like for you to refer. Is there a higher human capital accumulations because those are more dynamic cities or places, or is it in the opposite direction? They are more dynamic places because they have more human capital skills. And the second is, of course, and you say clearly the importance these cities